Hey, I'm Pat. I'm about to make a terrible mistake, and you're here watching it.
Why do I always get stuck with the icky jobs?
So, some time ago, I put out a video detailing just a couple of easy-to-miss things in the original Kingdom Hearts. At the top of that video, I stated that Kingdom Hearts 1 is my favorite game of all time, and how, important distinction here, it's my favorite. I'm not saying it's the best. People would probably take issue with me claiming it as either, like, wow, this guy's never played Over the Hedge Hammy Goes Nuts for Nintendo DS before, but I'm not going to try and convince anyone that Kingdom Hearts is better than Ocarina of Time or whatever the big consensus best game is. Even I'm not dumb enough to try and do that. But still, you might think I'm crazy for saying I'd rather play this Disney Square mishmash from 2002 over anything else. Anything else, including Kingdom Hearts 2, which has become the holy grail of the series and maybe of action RPGs, or at least one of the top shelf examples of one. And I've always felt like a crazy person for preferring 1 over 2. Don't get me wrong, KH2 is in my top 10 as well. It's actually number 8. KH3 is number 7. That's another hot take that makes me look like a real good tomato-throwing target. A discussion for another day. But everyone and their mother and their grandmother and their nobody seems to opine that KH2 does everything better than the first game. A perfect sequel is a phrase I see tossed around a lot. And that's fine if you think that. I'm not here trying to convert anyone or tell anyone they're wrong. I just want to justify what feels like a surprisingly uncommon opinion. A lot of this is going to come down to what I prioritize in a game, and your priorities might look different than that. Totally fine. I feel like I shouldn't have to have this cushiony prelude to my argument, but it's the internet. It's also going to seem like I'm bashing on KH2 a lot, but that game is still amazing in its own right. As I said, it's still a favorite of mine. Just keep in mind that I love all of these games. I wouldn't have bought them all multiple times if this wasn't the case. If you're watching this stupidly long video about the Kingdom Hearts series, I promise you we are on the same team here. I completely respect your opinion if 2 or 3 just does more for you. Whether your favorite is 1, 2, or 3, we've all got something in common. We're all children with bad taste. I'm kidding. Mostly. At the end of the day, though, Kingdom Hearts is like pizza to me. It's usually going to be good. Coated might be pineapple pizza. The phone game might be a series of crusts that occasionally leads you to a piece of pepperoni that's going to be very important for later pizzas. I digress. Why do you like KH1 the best? Ask nobody. Here's why. Story and pacing.
This is my story, and you're not part of it.
So, just to start, I'll be the first to defend the convoluted Kingdom Hearts plot stuff. I really don't think it's that bad if you can suspend a little bit of disbelief and invest some time and attention into learning the rules of the world. The time travel stuff is obviously not ideal, but I don't have the energy to be outraged by it. Like, is that not just the most tired commentary someone can provide about the story at this point? 17 years into the series, yelling and getting all high-pitched about how confusing it is. It's entirely valid, I'm just not all that impressed by the take in 2019. Also, let's just take a step back real quick. We're already in a series in which Donald Duck says, "Hey look, it's Sephiroth." It's not high art we're dealing with here. I'm okay with accepting the absurdity and retcons and occasional inconsistency because I tend to enjoy the execution, but I won't fault anyone who takes umbrage at all the anime friendship silliness. Point is, I won't argue in favor of the simpler days of KH1 or the twisted up knots of plot threads from Chain of Memories onwards. I enjoy both. This isn't so much about that, I'm more so talking about the pacing differences of 1 and 2. I don't care if the story is more self-contained or part of a complicated multi-installment arc, but I do care about how you pace that out. But if it's not high art, why do you care about the pacing? Because I want my nonsense portioned out and evenly distributed. And this is something that's been brought up a lot lately in the wake of 3 coming out. People say the pacing in 3 is really bad, and while I think it can definitely be improved in some spots, I kind of like 3's pacing the most, which is sort of an oddball take. I don't want to spend too much time talking about 3 since that's not really the focus of this video, but for me the only thing that 2 has over 3 would be the more definitive middle point, that being the second visit to Hollow Bastion for what is admittedly one of the best moments in the series. But I feel people conveniently forget that 2/3 of KH2 is, for lack of a better term, filler-ish. Almost everything between the prologue and the midpoint in 2 comes off as filler to me. Everything between the midpoint and the world that never was, more filler. The beginning, middle, and end of 2 are phenomenal. The bread of the sandwich is great, and the piece of bread that's in the middle for some reason. But the meat, the lettuce, well, I don't feel it contributes that much to the importance of the sandwich. This is not to say that 1 or 3 flawlessly integrate the Disney stuff into the overarching plot, but I think they do it a lot better, or at least try harder. Aside from the occasional appearance of an organization member in 2, the consequences of the Disney worlds are very insulated to themselves. Like, sure, Demyx shows up in the underworld, but it never really amounts to anything aside from Sora commenting, "Oh hey, we saw you in the underworld" later on. Xigbar in Land of Dragons, even more pointless. I guess it's to cause confusion over whether or not Sora saw him or Riku, but Xigbar doesn't wield the Soul Eater, so I don't know. At least your second visit to Beast Castle has you taking out Zaldin, but it's not exactly like he's a big mover and shaker in the organization like a Sayax or a Xigbar is. This is, once more, not to say that KH1 beautifully integrates its Disney World stuff into the main plot, but it teases stuff out and there's a little bit more continuity there. One of my favorite examples is, believe it or not, Deep Jungle, and you're probably scratching your head, how can this world that canonically doesn't even exist anymore have any plot significance? Well, it's the slideshow. It's that Hollow Bastion tease, that hint hint nudge nudge to the game's big twist like 4 to 6 worlds before it actually happens. How about Riku showing up at the end of Agrabah to kidnap Jasmine? Like, I can show you another world, it's the inside of this burlap sack slung over my shoulder, get in. How about King Triton being like, "Yo, the key bearer is an asshole, stay away from my daughter"? How about Jack and Dr. Fink trying to domesticate the Heartless and figure out what makes them work? The Disney worlds in 1 have these, for lack of a better term, world-building moments. They're still very much stepping stones to the meat and potatoes in the last third, but they're at least sprinkled with, I don't know, bacon bits or something. A lot of food metaphors here. The only time KH2 ever does stuff like this successfully in my eyes is with Tron and Space Paranoids. That's like the only time any of the Disney stuff matters. The Disney worlds in KH2 feel very self-concerned, almost like the worlds themselves didn't even want to show up. Even the villains that get recruited this time around, they really only give a shit about their own goals. In KH1, we get to see all of the villains get super giddy about Maleficent's plan to access the final keyhole and be granted supreme knowledge and power. In KH2, Pete finds Barbossa and Scar on Craigslist, and they half-heartedly pretend to be interested in whatever's going on. They're like, yeah, big dog cat guy with zippers all over, cool, but what about pirate treasure and fratricide? Defeating Jafar in KH1 feels like an accomplishment because the scenes of the villain meetings make it apparent that you're taking out a key figure, like Maleficent's right-hand man. Killing Barbossa or Scar is whatever because you just showed up 20 minutes ago when the locals were like, "You there, key him in the face, please." Even though Pete and on one occasion Maleficent show up in several worlds, it's also episodic and never super cohesive with any sort of master plans. This week on KH2, Pete takes a vacation to the underworld, but his roommate's a total hothead. Tune in next time where Maleficent tries to revive Oogie Boogie, but he's got different plans in mind.
I've done a little redecorating.
But in KH1, everyone's got a united agenda: collect princesses and try to stop the kid who keeps bludgeoning us with a key. Now you might be saying, well, who cares about the Disney villain stuff? They're irrelevant in KH2, and that's kind of part of the problem in my eyes. Admittedly, I don't know how you fix it. The thing is, the Villain Council, and especially Maleficent, felt like the big bads for 3/4 of KH1. You had the Heartless running around, sure, but they didn't have a face or leadership to them until Ansem shows up at the 11th hour. The problem is that Ansem and any subsequent Kingdom Hearts original villains, especially the organization, are always going to be inherently more interesting and consequential than the Disney bad guys. Ansem being the puppet master behind Maleficent is a rug you can only pull out one time. If KH2 tried to convince you that Maleficent was going to be the final boss, you wouldn't believe it, nor should you. So it's kind of a rock and a hard place dilemma, and one that is still very much present in KH3. The series is right to escalate the threat level, but it's floundering in how it utilizes those who were once the big threats. If it were up to me, Maleficent should have just stayed dead since she's had no agency or clout ever since she got stabbed by Riku Ansem at Hollow Bastion. Instead, her and Pete have become what people have described as the Team Rocket of Kingdom Hearts. Except I always thought Team Rocket was funny, or at least entertaining. In 2 and 3, I just feel like my time's being wasted whenever Pete and Maleficent are on screen. So, like I said, I don't know how you fix that. Either do away with the Disney villain faux threat, or find a way to give them more consequence and weave them into the main plot. As of now, they're just a nuisance, but maybe there's something brewing moving forward in the series concerning the black box and all that stuff, but if I had to guess, they'll be taking a backseat once again to the Foretellers, Lushu, and the Master of Masters. Before moving on, I should restate, I'll take the organization over the Disney villains and Ansem any day. I'm much more interested in what the former have going on between the hidden agendas and underhanded politics and rad hairstyles. Nice horns, dork. The story that KH2 is trying to tell is much more ambitious, and there is a panoply of moving parts to keep track of. It has a much more exciting middle point than KH1. I'm all about it. My problem is that I feel like I have to wade through a lot of chit-chat with Mrs. Potts and telenovela episodes in the Caribbean to get to those 3 really intriguing plot explosions. As a kid first playing Kingdom Hearts 1, it was exciting to go to a new Disney World, and not just because I was a dumb little baby. It was because the plot was actually getting pushed along as we went, so completing a Disney World meant getting more intel on the Kingdom Hearts universe at large, either during or after beating the world. Only 4 years later, and still very much as a child, I quickly realized during my first playthrough of KH2 that the Disney Worlds were chores that had to be dealt with once I got through Land of Dragons and then just flew my gummy ship over to Beast Castle or Olympus Coliseum or wherever. No meeting of the villainous minds, no teasing slideshows or overbearing aquatic monarchs dropping Keyblade lore and coming dangerously close to turning their daughter into a fish stick. As much as I do love KH2, even on my first playthrough as a 4th grader, I knew that I was doing a whole lot of busy work and would have to wait until I got back to some original worlds to get anything of interest or consequence. And boy, when that stuff comes, it's a fun time, but it's like, man, I went to Imperial China and all I got was this crappy Keyblade. World design and exploration.
This world is just too small.
Oh boy. So, this is kind of a controversial thing. Since this is an especially contentious subject, I'll put it delicately to start off. The worlds in Kingdom Hearts 2 are like my ass.
Ew!
Oh, you think that's gross, do ya?
They're flat as hell, there's nothing going on there. And maybe you're fine with that, maybe you even like it, in which case I've got a game and a phone number for you. But like I said up top, we're getting down to what we prioritize in a game here, and I don't think you're a dum-dum if you don't prioritize exploration in your Kingdom Hearts games. I would, however, have a civilized debate with you during which I only make 1 or 2 disparaging comments about your mom if you think the KH2 has more interesting worlds than KH1. I've seen the argument that you shouldn't really care that the worlds in KH2 are kind of flat and plain because it's an action game based around combat. You know, we're not here to jump onto flagpoles and leap across bottomless pits, but you can't deny that KH1 is also an action game based around combat, and it also managed to have level designs that felt like more than boxes with differently painted walls depending on which world you're in. And again, maybe you're glad that KH2 stripped away all of the platforming and puzzle solving because that's not what you're playing the game for. I totally get that. For me, that stuff was a supplement and a complement instead of a nuisance. I had a lot more fun in the KH1 iterations of Agrabah or Halloween Town because I didn't feel like I was being railroaded on a guided tour of the world. I had to jump around, solve some small puzzles, figure things out, and I felt rewarded for it. Like, here's a great example, and I feel like this is good for determining whether or not you'll agree with me on most of this stuff. One of my favorite rooms in KH1 is Oogie's Manor. It's this huge, intimidating fortress that you have to work your way up, fighting Heartless along the way, snagging treasure chests, and solving some micro-puzzles like lighting the lift or hitting the lever to open the green door. And you can fall off the damn thing, and if you do, it's tough. You gotta work your way back up. I can't even imagine an area like this in KH2. Now, some of you are like, God, you know what? Yeah, that room was really cool. And some of you are like, good, I'm glad there's nothing like that in KH2. Oogie's Manor sucks ass. I can see both perspectives on it. Bottom line is, I often felt like KH2 was holding my hand and making it practically impossible that I'd even be remotely unsure of where to go or what to do next. Halloween Town in KH2 is another great example of that, actually. In 2, the world is basically a straight line. The only possible detours are 2 practically empty rooms that serve as boss arenas. You can get from one end of the map to the other in a ridiculously short amount of time. In KH1, if you're starting out at the lab, getting to the evil playroom at the top of Oogie's Manor is like a goddamn journey. You can't just glide or quick run your way from A to B. Again, you might be like, well, I'm glad it doesn't take long to get from A to B. I just want to skip over all that and get to the good stuff anyway. But for me, a considerable percentage of that good stuff consists of the journey getting skipped over, and that's something that I feel happens in almost all of the Disney worlds in KH2. This is, I think, something of an overcorrection. As much as I love how KH1 doesn't spoon-feed you what you need to do next, it has moments that are admittedly quite unintuitive. In my opinion, one of the worst occasions of this is the first visit to Traverse Town when Sid tells you to look around for your friends. I think it trends in the right direction of being an organic way to get you to explore the new world you're in, but on first playthrough, it's pretty unclear what you need to do to trigger the next cutscene and thus move the story forward. Exiting areas in the town will cause the game to show you little scenes of Donald and Goofy entering that same area right after you leave, which might lead the player to believe that they have to keep doing this until they bump into them. You might explore all 3 districts and head back to Sid, and there's still no plot progression. The actual trigger here is defeating a certain number of shadows. I want to say it's 5, but the game never really gives you an honest indication of that being something that you must do. It's just kind of banking on the fact that you'll want to fight them. And granted, most players probably do, but even so, they're not going to surmise that after killing 5 enemies right at the second district entrance, they can just turn right back around and move the story along. I wouldn't blame you if you were hopping around in the Gizmo shop or the 3rd district trying to figure out how to move things along and didn't think that you'd actually need to go back and tell Sid that you haven't had any luck in your search. So I think KH2 was trying to avoid anything even remotely close to moments like this, but as I mentioned, I do think it's an overcorrection. I think KH1 catches a lot of sort of unwarranted flack for being cryptic or not giving the player enough information or guidance, and I have to push back on that a bit. KH1, as I see it, really rewards you for paying close attention to the cutscenes, voiced or otherwise. If you were to play KH1 for the first time and skip the cutscenes and mash through the text bubble dialogue, you'd be appropriately lost. You'd likely still be running around Destiny Islands trying to figure out how many times you need to beat Waka to a pulp until he tells you what the heck a Kingdom Hearts is. For better or worse, I think it's a mixture of both, KH2 will never leave you hanging if you decide to go make a sandwich while Roxas and company are shooting the breeze in Twilight Town. If you pause, you'll be nudged in the right direction, and even more, the game may just straight up tell you no other way if it finds you running into an invisible wall that leads to an area which has nothing to offer in the way of plot progression. This is kind of unfortunate because I feel like the game doesn't trust me to figure something out on my own, although I'm sure it can also be incredibly useful if you put the game down for a few months and you can pick it up again without feeling totally lost. If I stop playing KH1 when you first meet Kerchak in the deep jungle and start playing again weeks later, I'm probably not going to remember that the characters were musing about how it looked like Kerchak was looking towards the treehouse. Now, whereas KH1 can and will let you hop around the entire world and find the right room, KH2 would probably block me from going back to the camp area and give me some text about which way I need to go. If I had in fact stopped playing the game for an extended amount of time, I'd probably prefer the KH2 method of handling things, but if I'm actually playing through the world in one sitting, I'd much rather the game trust me to make my way to the treehouse without any additional assistance or guidance because I was paying attention to what the characters were talking about. In summary, I get that KH1 can kind of feel like it sometimes just drops you off and says good luck, but I'd much rather the game let me struggle a bit than for it to put me in a playpen so I don't get lost or hurt myself. Definitely a matter of preference, but I feel much more rewarded in KH1 when I go to the right place and do the right thing. And speaking of rewards, treasure chests. This may come off as pretty nitpicky, but hear me out on this. KH2, in my estimation, totally drops the ball when it comes to finding treasure chests, and it totally makes sense that it does. If exploration has been relegated to what is practically a non-factor, it's hard to reward the player for exploring. But KH2 still wants to have treasure chests, so it just puts them there. You don't have to jump across anything or solve any puzzles or even really look very hard, you just see it, and congrats, you've earned it. The best KH2 can ever do is put treasure chests up against a wall because its world design doesn't lend to any sort of remotely discreet hiding places or obstacles for the chests to be locked behind, and so, not unlike the Disney worlds, collecting treasure in KH2 never feels consequential or rewarding, it's just something on the checklist. And the game takes this to a literal level in the form of the journal keeping track of every individual treasure chest in the game and whether or not you've opened them. The irony here is that such a feature would be 10 times more useful in KH1, and if you've seen that last segment of my 90 obscure things about KH1 video, you would know why. The reason why I've gone literally a decade or longer not knowing where some chests are in KH1 is because the game refuses to tell me about them. Why would I ever leave them unopened if the game tells me they exist? This is perhaps less a criticism that KH2 should have to shoulder on its own, and more so something that has been increasingly prevalent in games over the last few console generations, including all subsequent major Kingdom Hearts games. At some point, maybe in the early 2000s, games became self-aware of the completionist nature that many players have about them. Specifically, I'm talking about games that aren't first and foremost collectathons like a Banjo-Kazooie or Spyro the Dragon. Games like GTA or Assassin's Creed that want you to pour your time into finding all of its collectibles, but they don't want to frustrate you by locking special features or secret endings behind hundreds of collectibles in their increasingly big worlds, so they give you a to-do list out of mercy. The player's rabid desire to find all the stuff became a built-in and supported feature of the experience. Kingdom Hearts 1 even does this to a degree, but only with a subcategory of collectibles, that being the 99 Dalmatian puppies. In the original release, if you were playing on standard difficulty and wanted to see the secret ending, another side, another story, you had to rescue all of the puppies. The game, in fact, gives you a checklist of the puppies and how many of them can be found in each world. However, I prefer the way Kingdom Hearts 1 handles it in that even if you complete the journal in its entirety, it still leaves you stuff to do if you want to do it. And it's sincere about that. There's no overarching reward for finding every treasure chest because, as corny as it is, the reward is the feeling you get for finding them. In the aforementioned video I made, I talk about this chest in the waterway in Hollow Bastion. I first found that one when my friend and I were just casually playing the game, and we lost our shit when we came across it. We didn't care that there was dark matter in the chest or that finding it would contribute to unlocking something. We cared because the game surprised us, and we felt smart for finding one of its secrets 17 years later after we had first played it. And in a way, you actually can benefit in a more tangible sense, and that's through synthesis. Materials like dark matter and mithril can be synthesized, and you'll need to make a few of each to unlock the final list of synthesizable items, but you can cut down on the tedium of grinding Heartless if you investigate your surroundings. As fun as any game's combat is, I don't think grinding for item drops is ever necessarily a highlight of anyone's experience, and so the game rewards you for being astute in situations like these. In KH2, it would be silly to start working towards the end of the synthesis list before collecting all of the treasure chests, and since the game hands you its grocery list, the opportunity for the aforementioned situation is missed. All this to say, I wish KH2 could have tried a little harder when it comes to its collectibles. Funnily enough, I think Trinity marks are much more suited for KH2 than 1, since they're not so much hidden as they are locked behind you gaining the ability to perform them. Since KH2's chests are so out in the open and not exactly covertly placed anyway, Trinity marks would fit right in. Plus, in 2, you can swap Donald and Goofy in and out of the party on the fly, which was a sorely needed feature when it came specifically to Trinity marks in KH1. KH2 Final Mix did a bit of course correcting in this regard in the form of puzzle pieces, many of which you can only reach by upgrading your drive form abilities, and I do think it's a step in the right direction and more in the spirit of KH1, although it leads me to my next point, albeit a more minor one. Atmosphere and contextualization.
It's Riku! They put bugs in him!
What the hell are the puzzle pieces, and why would anyone care if you found them or not? It's a crown-shaped thing that Sora finds on the floor in the mysterious tower, and oh, okay, I guess we're just going with that. Alright, great. Nitpicky again? Yeah, maybe, but it's just kind of frustrating that KH2 totally downgrades in this regard. Take the puppies again, for example. Even though the game provides you a list and under some specific circumstances can lock you out of content unless you find them all, the game does an excellent job in not only making these collectibles fun and memorable, but they also make sense and are cohesive with the world of the game. As for the point of them being fun and memorable, I'm hard-pressed to think of any other game's collectibles that feel as rewarding to gather as the Dalmatians. They don't just become a checked-off section in your journal, you can go to their house in Traverse Town and see the fruits of your labor. For God's sake, one of the puppies in the dining room will just follow you around. You are his idol and savior. It's so much more involved and tangible than anything KH2 has to offer in the way of collectibles, and that brings me to another point about context. As I mentioned with the puzzle pieces, there's no explanation or really any motivating factor for collecting them outside of this is a video game and you should grab shiny things. Sure, it's nice that you at least have to figure out where they go in the puzzle, but once you do, the game may as well say dispensing reward as it spits out some accessory or synthesis material. In fact, the completed puzzle pictures themselves don't make any sense in the context of the world. It's all artwork, which is admittedly very nice, but Sora must be like, that's weird, I don't remember posing for this, and who's that blonde hair kid? I know, this is all very petty stuff, it just adds up for me. The Dalmatians are the exact opposite of this. The game explains to you, both through its characters and through omniscient text in case you missed the former, that the puppies have been scattered throughout the world ever since theirs came to an end. As we've come to understand that Traverse Town is a refugee world for those put in that situation, it makes sense that Pongo and Perdita have taken up residence here. And even when it comes to how you're gradually rewarded for finding the puppies, the game chooses to give just a bit of context, unlike when you slot in a puzzle piece and the game itself just poofs an item into your inventory. With the puppies, the game shows you a little cutscene of the pooches presenting Sora with a gift for rescuing them. And I mean, doesn't it make sense that the Dalmatians would go around scrounging up gifts to give Sora since they have no way of communicating with him otherwise but still want to convey their gratitude? It's in small ways like these that KH1 makes even its optional side quests cohesive with the world and plot at large. I'll give you another example, the summon gems. In KH1, in addition to Genie and Tinkerbell, you'll come across at least 2 to 4 more summons in the form of summon gems. When you take the first of these, Earthshine, to the fairy godmother, she explains that the gem contains the heart of a creature who managed to endure the destruction of its homeworld due to their strength. Not unlike the puppies, these gems have been scattered to the winds. Again, KH1 is going out of its way to take special care of even its more minor stuff and work it into the ongoing crisis that is underway during the course of the game. I'm not saying this is a mind-blowing and totally bulletproof explanation as to why we can twirl our Keyblade until Dumbo appears, but I just have to appreciate the effort that goes into providing an explanation. In KH2, Sora can acquire 4 summon charms, and God, could the world be any less interested in providing any reasoning for why these things are laying around or why they do what they do? Merlin kind of half-asses it and says, yeah, just focus on it and believe and they'll show up to help you. But why, Merlin? Why do you have this baseball necklace that has the power to unleash Zach Braff Chicken? I've never met Chicken Little. He's not dead, right? His world should be a-okay since we handled the whole world-ending crisis in KH1, so he isn't trapped inside the charm due to his enduring spirit. And Merlin's like, listen, kid, you're one of maybe 5 people who give a shit about this. Don't you know that you can use drive forms in this game? What the hell are you complaining about this for? But Merlin, later on when I go to pick up the ukulele charm or the feather charm, the game doesn't even let me wonder what it does. In the item description, it's like, hey, remember Peter Pan? Yeah, this is the thing that makes a Peter Pan happen. Like, man, I know in Cage 2 you don't have to take the charms to anyone to make them work, but wasn't it fun as a kid grabbing Nature Spark or Fire Glow and getting to wonder who was inside? It was like when you got a new game as a kid and your mom's driving you home and you can only read the back of the case and the manual to tide yourself over. All of that within a game. I can't wait until I get home to throw this rock at my magic grandma. In Cage 2, couldn't they have, I don't know, put some question marks in my summon menu until I used it for the first time so that it's at least something of a surprise when Stitch shows up to help me in battle? Ironically, I think this is also an example of a slight charm issue that Cage 2 has for me, at least when compared to Cage 1. Cage 2 is still very charming in its own right, I mean look at these two goobers, but there is still something especially whimsical and endearing about Cage 1, and to an extent Cage 3, that I think the second installment doesn't quite measure up to. I'll just plug my own video again, but I was able to find 90 quirky, out-of-the-way things about Cage 1, and a handful of commenters were able to help me push that number past 100. Now, I'm not saying an equivalent video is off the table for Cage 2, but in doing a bit of preemptive field research, I can already tell that such a video would be noticeably shorter and not for a lack of trying. Cage 2 simply does not hold as many secrets, and this is in part due to the previously mentioned issues with world design and the lack of trust the game has in the player. Another minor example here that I think might help illustrate my point on a grander scale, this right here. If this small feature was as frequent in KH1 as it is in 2, that video that I made is much shorter. It pops up here and there in KH1, items you can examine for some more information like the hotel desk or the paintings, but this is taken to a whole other level in KH2. Every single thing that might be of interest is labeled alongside some boring flavor text that leaves nothing to your imagination. I encourage you to take a walk around Twilight Town, which is one of my favorite worlds in KH2, and try to find things in the same vein of what I came across in Traverse Town or Hollow Bastion in KH1. All of these small world-building oddities are replaced by very sterile, to-the-point explanations of what you're seeing on screen. Let me put it this way, wouldn't the secret place in KH1 be so much less charming and interesting if all of the drawings had a text box to describe what's happening and to feed you the backstory of how those cave markings got there? The one instance I can think of where KH2 has the right idea is in the White Room of the Old Mansion, which trusts the player to figure out what all of Naminé's drawings are depicting. KH1, I feel, really embraces a stop and smell the roses mentality, whereas KH2's roses are much less organic, like an artificial attempt to mimic the original. Data Marluxia, basically. This is the part where a belligerent member of the audience says, if this guy hyperfixates on one more incredibly small aspect of the game, I'm going to punch him in the stomach. Well, hey, speaking of violence, combat.
I just got slugged!
Want some more?
So, listen, I'm not going to attempt to argue that KH1 has a better or deeper combat system than KH2. There is a lot more polish and substance to what KH2 is doing, and I'm sure for many of you, this factor is what weighs the heaviest when determining which game you prefer. I definitely can't blame you for that, as hitting things is the central, fundamental crux of both installments' gameplay. I would be in over my head to attempt to argue that KH2 does not have the better combat mechanics when compared to KH1. But as I stated at the start of this video 9 days ago, the best and my favorite are two separate things. I think it's simply a less is more thing for me when it comes to combat. You have a lot at your disposal in KH2, and that's not something I fault the game for. Between magic, limits, summons, drive forms, and all sorts of crazy abilities, you're basically a badass right off the bat. Or struggle bat, as it were. I think this is all only natural, as you would expect Sora to be a more powerful force to be reckoned with by the time he's on his second adventure, year-long amnesia nap aside. So I'm not asking KH2 to do anything differently in this regard. For me, I tend to enjoy, in video games in general, playing from behind. KH1 has a way of making sure you feel like the underdog for most of the game, and I just kind of prefer feeling like an underdog in a battle as opposed to a destroyer of worlds. Sora is very grounded and limited in KH1. KH2 Sora fights effortlessly and can dish out a flurry of attacks incredibly quickly depending on the abilities you've got equipped. I completely understand the appeal of that, and I definitely enjoy it quite a lot, but just not quite as much as the more intimidating battles you come across in KH1. Make no mistake, neither of these games are particularly difficult, and KH2 actually edges out KH1 in that department with its inclusion of critical mode, which is something that KH1 lacks. When it comes to comparing both games' toughest encounters, the optional bosses in KH2, especially the Final Mix exclusives, will always give you a much harder time and a slice of humble pie that can make you feel like you might as well be using your wooden sword during these data fights. But for me, when it comes to playing through the main story on standard or proud mode, the world of KH1 feels a lot scarier and harder to tame than KH2. Like, just to circle back to the treasure chest again, even when it comes to opening chests, Sora can just pop them open whenever he feels like in KH2, in the midst of combat or not. In KH1, you really have to work for it. If you're on a precarious ledge 100 feet above the rising falls in Hollow Bastion and you want to open that treasure chest, you're gonna have to take out these wyverns to claim your reward. You're just a kid who got a hold of this magic key and the world hates your guts. I'm not going to pretend that I'm totally bewildered by someone who finds it annoying that they can't simply open a chest while their command menu is red. It is, once again, very much a matter of preference. That's really all I've got to say on the combat of it all. Like I said, it's a tough sell for KH1 beyond those vague proclivities that I have, but I felt I had to at least bring it up. And now, as we bring this thing in for a landing, a lightning round of points that I couldn't find a natural place for in the script.
Too clever. I'm Larxene.
I like the Olympus tournament so much more in KH1. I don't know, I just like that there were these named teams of heartless opponents. Like what, do they just all hang out in a locker room until each match starts? KH2's Olympus Cups just aren't as charming and they throw all these gimmicks at you. I get that it's to spice things up a bit, but I enjoyed the simplicity of just me versus a set amount of bad guys. At least 2 has a Coliseum. Speaking of which, I like the Heartless designs in 1 so much more, and I find them a lot more memorable. A lot of the ones in 2 are just too cute or Generation 5 Pokemon-ish for my taste. KH1 has these organic, kind of intimidating Heartless designs, things like the Gargoyles, the Wyverns, Invisibles. When I think of KH2 Heartless, I think of those hammer guys, these drill guys, the car guys, all of which I couldn't remember the names of without looking them up on the wiki. They feel less natural and much more like objects that have been possessed by some dark force, like Poltergeist. I should note that I'm not crazy about the new KH3 Heartless either, although the nobodies in 2 and 3 are much more in line with the spirit of the KH1 Heartless designs in my eyes. And lastly, and I touched on this a bit before, but I get this real foreboding feeling from the atmosphere of KH1. Like, there is an active apocalypse going on, and I always feel a greater sense of urgency in 1 when compared to 2. The world you start on literally ends, and this is something that's just been happening and is ongoing throughout the game.
Look, a star's going out.
Puppies are displaced, woodland creatures have been forced to take refuge inside magical rocks lest they just straight up die instead, and 7 girls have been kidnapped and trapped in the rock candy from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's all so very dire. Despite all of the evil plans and manipulation going on by way of the organization in KH2, the world itself is pretty much at peace. It's really just Sora and company who are being antagonized. The Heartless aren't so much an invading force in KH2, more like a nuisance, like, oh man, my Animal Crossing town is covered in weeds, I should take care of that. It also just so happens that Tom Nook is pulling my strings, as every weed I pick brings him closer to becoming an all-knowing super god. Of course, it would be silly and redundant for KH2 to just rehash the dire conditions of KH1 again, and KH2 has its own unique and enjoyable atmosphere, but I just prefer the sort of oppressive and anxious undertones of the first game. Alright, I think I've rambled on for far longer than I'm sure most people would care to listen. I'll just clarify one more time, for my own sake, I love these stupid goddamn games, I love all of them, and I love talking about them. The past half year or so has seen a bit of an uptick in toxicity when it comes to discussion surrounding the series, and I hope we can all collectively find our way back to a point where stating our opinion on these things isn't grounds for so much vitriol, because I think it's good for fans of any type of media to talk about what they like and maybe don't like as much and whatever it is that they sink a lot of their time into. Like I said up top, my goal here wasn't to try and convert anyone to my opinion. I've just seen a lot of champions for KH2 as the pinnacle of the series, and I just wanted to get myself on the record singing the praises of what I feel is an underrated first installment of a consistently amazing series. I'm sure some or even many of you are going to disagree with a lot of what I said, and that's alright. If at any point you found that I seemed to be talking out of my ass or got some facts wrong,
This man speaks nonsense.
then please let me know. As long as we keep the debate healthy and in good faith, I've got no problem continuing the discussion. At the end of the day, we all share common ground in that we all found ourselves entranced by this series that conceptually shouldn't have even worked nearly as well as it does, and for that, I'm very thankful. Hey, thanks for watching and hopefully not booing at your screen as I dared to say such inflammatory things. If you enjoy this sort of long-form content, consider hitting subscribe and grabbing one of those blue thumbs down there and just jamming it right into my eye holes. And if you've got any suggestions for anything you'd like to see me tackle, Kingdom Hearts or otherwise, I'm all ears. I'm definitely planning a follow-up to the obscure KH1 video, which will factor in what I learned from the comments, as well as some other stuff I either forgot to include or discovered on my own after the fact. I also ranked all of the original Pokemon, if that's something that you're into. So, there's that. Okay, bye.